remember that these Germans are moving through country that was formerly occupied by civilians. Where the heck are they? Well, in a lot of cases, they're still there, and in very great danger. Here's what Karthan writes about that, quote, "The road was covered with the equipment the soldiers had thrown away. We, too, had long ago cast aside all unnecessary ballast. Thus we were marching when we passed a wood densely packed with refugees. Those hunted people had stretched blankets between the trees so as to protect themselves from the rain. There they were lying in the greatest conceivable misery, all in a jumble, men and women, children and graybeards. Their camp reached as far as the road, and one could observe the terrible hours that they'd lived through had left deep furrows in their faces. They looked at us with weary, tired eyes. The children begged us to give them some bread, but we had nothing whatsoever left, and were ourselves tormented by hunger. The enemy's shrapnel was still accompanying us, and we had scarcely left the wood when shrapnel began to explode there, which caused the refugees, now exposed to the fire, to crowd into the fields in an attempt to reach safety. Many of them joined us, but before long they were forbidden to use the road because they impeded the retreat of the troops. Thus all of them were driven without pity into the fields soaked by the rain." End quote. As German soldiers like Julius Karthan are retreating back the way they came, they're being closely pursued by their French and British adversaries, one of whom is the Irish soldier fighting in the British Expeditionary Force that we've talked about earlier, John Lucy, who writes about this time, quote, "Our advance continued steadily as the Germans were driven back from the Marne. Their rear guards showed some resistance every day, and occasionally we picked up stragglers and wounded from the enemy army. Although we took our turn in our brigade at advanced guard and outpost duties, our battalion did not really cross swords with the enemy again until the 14th of September. On that day, and on the few days preceding it, rain fell, and we were not very comfortable either in bivouac or on the line of march. The weather began to get cold. On the evening of 13th September, a British airplane, one of the few the British Army possessed, approached us from the German side, and wheeling around, alighted in a field to the right of our marching columns. The flying officer climbed slowly out of his machine, and, coming stumbling towards us in his heavy kit, did not wait to find an officer, but shouted to us all, 'There they are, waiting for you, up there, thousands of them!' And he waved his right arm toward the wooded heights across the River Aisne, some 3 miles away." End quote. The River Aisne was right by the highest elevated point in this whole area of the front. Now, it's not very high in terms of the grand scheme of geography around the planet, but in the very flat area near the French and Belgian borders, it was 500 feet tall in some places, and that gave a commanding view of all the flat country around it. This is the point that the German soldiers had been told to turn back around and face their pursuers and dig in and stop them. This had been one of the last commands made by the former German commander, the one whose job it was to carry out the Schlieffen Plan, Helmut von Moltke the Younger, before he totally collapsed from his nervous breakdown after his plan failed. He's replaced by one of his critics, a controversial choice that the Kaiser, tabbed, a guy named General Erich von Falkenhayn. Now, one thing that becomes clear when you look at the high commands of all these armies is that generals have outrageous egos most of the time, and they often are jealous and they snipe at their peers, and when Falkenhayn is named, it angers, among other people, Erich Ludendorff, this young wunderkind who's been doing great things for the Germans on the Eastern Front and who will say of Falkenhayn's appointment, "I am only capable of love and hate, and I hate General Falkenhayn." Falkenhayn was critical of von Moltke. Before the Battle of the Marne even starts, Falkenhayn looks at what von Moltke is doing and thinks he's lost his mind, and writes on September 5th, 1914, quote,